Some of you will remember years ago the words on TV about 7 o'clock or 7:25, and that's the way it is. January 12th, 2026. Walter Cronkite is a figure that I think had an impact on all of us, most of us, in many ways we knew or perhaps didn't. I'm still learning things. When he came out and against the war in Vietnam, forces were unleashed to curb the news and to do the sort of things that I came to learn were done during World War II. And earlier even that. Technologies were different, but the goals of the news were the same, more or less. All of this is by way of introducing our speaker today. I'm so happy that Janet Coates is here today. She is the director of the Coalition on Trust in Media and Technology. And that is a challenging task that should be taken up by a variety of people from different academic disciplines. And we're so happy to have her here as she'll be speaking about some of the recent events of the coalition. Janet, welcome.
All right. I am gifted by many mics. So, good afternoon. Oops. Okay. Okay. How about this? I would probably actually be better without the mic. I teach a class that has a big lecture class with 130 students in it, and they can hear me outside the room when I get started with them. So anyway, yes, they do not have the issue that I have with that. So I'm going to ramble around a little bit, and that is because my brain is rambling around a little bit these days. I would imagine that is a familiar feeling for many of us, and that's why we have this slide about press freedom, because the consortium focuses on trust in media. So that means a lot of focus on disinformation, misinformation, propaganda campaigns, malinformation, the things that are, that are intended to cause harm from an information environment standpoint. But in the last, I'm not sure why in the last year I've been thinking about this, but in the last year I've been thinking a lot more about how the information environment dovetails with First Amendment freedoms. Those things have been, in my work, just the foundational assumption that we're starting from this point of freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, petition, religion, that those are the givens, those are the foundational pieces, and then the work we're doing around research and writing and bringing together groups for conferences, it can really be focused on the spread of disinformation in social media, the disinformation campaigns globally, what AI means to disinformation. But I think where we are now, more and more, I'm thinking, I got to back up a step and look at what the current state of First Amendment freedoms, particularly in my area of interest, freedom of the press, and how that plays with the issues of trust. So I'm going to start there, and then I'm going to ramble back around to some of the current issues I see in the trust environment. But I'll begin with the press freedom piece. This is the presentation that I give to my students that they will see tomorrow for the first day of class. So you're getting the preview. This is the new and improved version. And I will disclose, as I do to them, the presentation pieces of it are created by AI. Not the text, not the content, but some of the presentational pieces. Not so much in this one, but in some of most of the ones I do in class, because I'm horrible with PowerPoint, just horrible. It takes me hours. It takes me hours and hours and hours, and then it looks like garbage. But with an AI tool that I use that creates presentations, I can put my presentation, my text, my words, my research into the AI generator, tell it not to change anything, and it gives me this beautiful, completed, presentation in about 90 seconds. So I am all in favor of that use of AI. Let's go back. So we all know that, what the First Amendment says. We are familiar with that. Everybody in this room certainly knows it. And I'm always impressed by how many of my students get all 5 freedoms. There's always one smart person, sometimes smart alecky person. They tend to wind up being the same, who gets assembly, which is the one they all forget. That or petition. Those are the ones that they forget. But in the last year, as we've looked at some of the ways that press freedom and freedom of speech have been damaged, stymied, interfered with, some of the examples here, the Jimmy Kimmel example, the remarks that Kimmel made in his monologue around the murder of Charlie Kirk. There is certainly a free speech element to that, but there's also a trust and disinformation element, because part of the push around the statements he was making, was, to restrict the statements, and we've seen this play out with the Charlie Kirk story, murder in particular, you can't say anything bad about that. But there's also a trust and an information integrity piece of that, because one of the things that that a democracy thrives on are comedians, the people who poke fun at power, the people who say the kind of outrageous thing that provokes conversation. And that also provokes conversation around the truth, the veracity of information. So when that is interfered with, there is a trust piece to that. There is an information integrity piece beyond even the First Amendment piece of that story. And we see this was the quote from Brendan Carr, that we can do this the easy way or the hard way. These companies can find ways to change conduct, to take action on Kimmel, or there's going to be additional work for the FCC ahead. So again, now we're talking about, again, to me, this is really the intersection between the freedom to speak and the freedom to speak things that are not necessarily what the government wants you to speak, which gets in, again, to that information trust and being able to have a marketplace of ideas where people are sharing different perspectives and points of view. And this one from a journalism standpoint and from the trust standpoint, the willingness of companies that own, Nexstar and Sinclair own most of the local television stations in this country. An overwhelming, I think it's better than 80% of local television is owned by these two companies. So when they say, we're going to step back from this, there certainly was the First Amendment question here about, pulling the Kimmel show entirely from the airwaves, but it is pulling a viewpoint, and it is blanking out a piece of the civic conversation, the civil conversation, the conversation in media. It's taking that piece out of the equation. And that's a lot of what misinformation and disinformation, particularly disinformation, which is the malicious, let's cause damage kind of trust destroyer, does, is it's taking pieces out, and it's putting new pieces in, or being selective about what is allowed to be said or published or aired. So this speaks to that piece as well. It's not just a Democrat liberal issue. And, you know, when Ted Cruz spoke up and said that this is, you know, that the chairman of the FCC is acting like a mafioso in saying, basically, nice little program you've got there, be a shame if anything happened to it. You know, that is Cruz recognizing and saying that right now it's speech that conservatives don't like, but it could be, the shoe could be on the other foot very easily. So, you know, when we see people, and we don't see much bipartisan conversation at all in the current environment, but the recognition here that this is a attempt to stifle information, to present one viewpoint that could affect whatever side of the political aisle you're on. And then Kimmel talking about how he didn't intend this to be something that made light of Charlie Kirk's death. And in fact, that's not what he said at all. And he had been very forthcoming about in offering sympathy to the Kirk family and talking about how this political violence is never okay. And again, this was one of those instances where what he said was portrayed in a different way, in a way that was not accurate, in a way that did not reflect the actual words he said, and talking about how moved he was by the people who spoke out. And the point he makes here, that what is important is not his show. His important is that we get to live in a country that allows us to have a show like this. When we talk about disinformation, misinformation, the move to restrict reporter access at the Pentagon is, to me, the most chilling example we've seen in the last year, because this speaks to the idea that information that challenges the viewpoint of the government or challenges the behavior of the government is information that should be restricted, that should not be part of the work of journalists in covering the Department of Defense. By having the reporters removed from the Pentagon, unless they're willing to say that they will not report anything that hasn't been approved and approved for release by the Defense Department, that's not journalism. And that's not information that builds trust or credibility if there's no ability of journalists to challenge it. It's prior restraint from a First Amendment point of view, plain and simple. The idea that that the government can keep you from publishing the product of journalism, so as opposed to, having that conversation after publication or any kind of sanction come after publication. Again, you see this weaving of this thread between the First Amendment and the protections on journalism and the press. And the press is, when it works the way it should, supposed to be the advocate for the people, the voice for the people, the organizations that ask the questions on the behalf of citizens. That when you can't do that, the ability to get verified, trustworthy information is compromised or just gone. We had President Trump say, when questioned about this, that nothing stops reporters. You know that. I can agree with the president on that one. But the next piece of the conversation are the lawsuits that are seeking to muzzle the press and that pose that threat to the free press. The most recent one, the suit against the BBC that was filed here in a federal court in Florida. There was a mistake in that story. That was corrected. Was it a $10 billion mistake? Was it actual malice by the standard of U.S. libel law? That'd be really difficult to prove. That long string of lawsuits against the press, ABC, CBS, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, both ABC and CBS reached agreements to pay settlements in the cases against them. The Times and the Journal continue to fight those suits. But this speaks again to the pressure on news organizations to not report stories that the government doesn't like, and again, not provide that fact-based, vetted information. The whole role, I tell my students on the first day, so they'll get to hear this tomorrow, that journalism is hard, and it's hard because it should be. It should be. Stakes are high, whether it's a local story or a national story or an international story. If you get it wrong, there is some kind of harm caused, even if it's small, and even if it doesn't rise to the standard of libel. There's the three cultures that are the most defensive cultures that are adverse to a lot of experimentation, are experimentation in terms of standard, are medicine. Research, yes, but the actual practice of medicine, the military, and journalism. And that's because the stakes are so high in each instance. Surgeons bury theirs, journalists publish theirs. And the military, well, I'll leave that to you all. But if you do not have a free press that is doing that really hard work of prosecuting information, I used to tell the journalists who worked for me, you need to treat a story like a prosecutor. You need to go in and you need to examine every piece of it. You need to challenge your own assumption. You need to say, I think this story is about X. Let me find somebody who will tell me, no, it's about Y. Let me find somebody who will, it's not just talk to the people who will support the, facts that you are putting together for this story, but will bring other perspectives, things that challenge whether that indeed is a fact. If you don't have news organizations that are doing that, then we continue to chip away, pull away from a basis of trusted information. And that world is tough enough already because everybody's living in their own bubble. Everybody's consuming their own brand of news, their own perspective. And so it's tough enough to break through that noise. And if you don't have the fodder, the material, to at least make that effort, then that trust piece continues to pull down. The latest Gallup poll, which was last fall, every fall Gallup releases a poll that they've been doing since, I think, since the 70s, around where the questions relate to trust in media. And the poll from this past fall, 28% said that they trusted media a good deal or a great deal, that they had trust in media. 34% said they had zero trust, no trust, none at all, don't believe a word they say. And another 32% said, I'm not feeling it. I don't feel particularly good about trusting media, but maybe there's some forms that I trust. That's a historic low, both on the I trust media and I don't trust it at all. So when we don't have that information environment where we have organizations like the Times, like the Journal, like ABC, CBS, who are able to do that prosecutorial work on journalism, you've got even less of that material to draw from in trying to make a case that here's how you know that something is trustworthy. AI changes the game, and it changes, it's changing the game in so many ways and for so many things, and not just for keeping me from having to do PowerPoints, although I love that. And it gets better and better all the time at doing those more complex tasks. I play with the AI models a lot. And it amazes me where things are now compared to where we were when ChatGPT first came on the scene. I've changed, as many professors have, I've changed my class to have the writing assignments done on paper in class, which with 130 students makes for a real good time for me on the other end of that. But that's the only way that I have a shot at being able to see if they are using AI. I mean, I have to walk the room and try to make sure that nobody's, got their phone or their computer in their lap. But in order to know that they know how to write, we really have to do that. So it's changed the game in so many ways. It's changed the game in terms of misinformation and disinformation. So the liar's dividend is really killing us in terms of the misinformation and disinformation environment. The existence, the very fact that there are deep fakes out there is really eroding trust and accountability. I don't know about you. I consider myself to be pretty darn sophisticated at spotting a deep fake or, a false information. And most of the time I get it because I spend all day working in that environment. But just even the existence, knowing this is out there, makes you question everything you see. I gotta say, I zipped right past the first videos out of Minneapolis because I thought that looks fake to me. How many other people did that? A lot, I would guess. A lot. So just the mere existence is breeding more distrust. It's making us more uncertain. And how many folks actually take the time to stop and to check? Not many people are as, obsessed as I am and consume as much information and are willing to do the fact checking and the jumping around and looking at other sources and looking at other perspectives. I think that liar's dividend is really changing. It's certainly changing my thinking about where the problem for trust in journalism and in technology is moving. And it wasn't like it wasn't complicated enough already. Trying to think about how we have that conversation, how we find ways to educate and mitigate around that problem will keep me up at night, already does. The ability to that speed and scale, like with my PowerPoint that I can do in 90 seconds, the speed and scale with which AI is able to generate fake news sites is remarkable. I mean, you don't need to know how to code anymore because the machine does the coding for you. And there have been some, they call them pink slime sites, the ones that are just fake, just full of fake information. I mean, somebody who knows their way around how to prompt the AI could put a pink slime site together in a morning, probably less than that if they were really well versed in it. I did it as an example for my class on media literacy, created one that was based in St. Petersburg, Florida, because I know that area really well, where it had things like the ethics policy of the news site I generated in AI. I generated stories for it. I generated bios for fake reporters with fake photos to go with them. And it took me longer because I'm not as well versed in how to prompt it. If I tried to do it now with the current state of tools like Gemini or Claude, I think even more than ChatGPT, I'd really be able to go to town. So just stumbling along, looking for local information in particular, which local information is more trusted. Every bit of research shows that people trust their local news far more than they trust national news. And now you're trying to, Google something find a local news source. You are as likely as not, unless you specifically know the local sources in your town, to find something that's been generated by AI. It really makes it hard to be able to. There's so much coming at us at one time. I give my students a news quiz every week, and I was thinking about this when I was walking to my car to come over here. How in the heck am I going to give these 19 and 20-year-olds a news quiz each week where I'm not just writing it the morning of class, because everything has changed in the course of a week's worth of news consumption? We're going to see. They hate that news quiz with the power of 10,000 suns anyway, and now I got to figure out how we're going to do it in a news environment that's moving so fast. AI has a huge impact on investigative journalism. It can be a real boon for investigative journalism because it allows you to analyze large data sets with the kind of efficiency that would be impossible. You could put 100 journalists on a large data set and not be able to analyze it with in as comprehensive and timely a way as you can using an AI. But it can also do these things: automated surveillance, I know this is happening. I know this is happening around journalists, and I'm sure around activists as well, that facial recognition that allows, and predictive tools, predictive movement tools that allow you to track journalists in real time, allow you to identify who journalists are meeting with. So being able to out anonymous sources. Being able to match relationships between reporters and whistleblowers. Being able, journalists use encryption methods to communicate with people who are anonymous sources, people who are whistleblowers. But if you have the pattern matching, you're able to identify the communication steps, the connections between a journalist and someone who may be a source for them. So that makes the encryption even more difficult. Makes it less effective. Just the awareness that AI surveillance is there can cause sources to dry up. People are afraid that the AI is always watching, and that they'll be picked up and punished in some way, whether by an employer or in some other setting. And of course, authoritarian regimes are using AI tools now to monitor journalists who are not even in their country anymore, who have exiled or been self-exiled or have been exiled. So this speaks to the ability to gather trusted and verified information, and it speaks to that liar's dividend issue, because it's the assumption that this is happening that chills people's behavior, because they know that this is everywhere. And then the black box, the automated censorship and gatekeeping. Flagging social platforms have used AI for a long time to flag content, to moderate content. And originally AI was used to moderate content in terms of looking for things that were damaging or things that were false, or disinformation campaigns or misinformation campaigns. But it's also been used historically and is being used now to flag legitimate content, legitimate reporting from war zones or conflict zones, human rights violations as being violent, tagging that content to suppress it. Being trained on biased data sets. It's junk in, junk out with AI. The AI is us. It's trained on our words and activity. And if you train the AI on biased information, then the AI is biased, and can wind up silencing groups and communities. The takedowns. If you have your post taken down by one of the platforms, trying to appeal that is long and messy. I had when Hurricane Milton was coming in. I lived in the Sarasota, Tampa area for a long time, have a lot of friends still down there. And so I posted to Facebook, here's, some tips about identifying disinformation and misinformation related to the storm. Here are things we've seen in other markets, in other disasters that you need to keep an eye on. And here's some good trusted sources of information for you to use. And Facebook took that post down. Took it down. And so I immediately posted back and said, well, my post to try to help you find quality information got tagged by Facebook as not such quality information, and there it went. And you know, the process of trying to appeal that, it can take weeks. I mean, this storm would be passed. You know, I'm like, if you want to know what I said, reach out. Here's my, you know, reach me by email. But that takedown process can be just as insidious as, you know, the creation of disinformation, because again, you're looking at ways that you are pulling trusted information, fact-based information out of the environment. And then the shadow banning piece, which, you know, lots of times people claim that they've been shadow banned, or the organization or individual they follow has been shadow banned, and that does happen. But more likely, your behavior has shifted the algorithm in some way that's causing you not to see it. But it is a piece of what AI can do. I think that's it. Yeah. See, I'm done. Questions? That. Okay. Okay.
Any questions? Yes.
Thank you for an informative and scary.
That's me, informative and scary.
You know,
when you teach, I've taught media literacy, so the disinformation, misinformation course, 3 times a ways ago. I'm not teaching that currently. And you know, you're really digging into some things that can be controversial there. And I had no issues then. Principles of journalism, I mean, you can't talk about principles of journalism without getting in, I mean, this is rough stuff, you know, and I've had no pushback at all. Yeah, it's good. My class was taking an exam when Charlie Kirk was shot. They weren't supposed to have their phones, but of course they did. And there was a ripple through the room because they saw the video. And I decided just from the way they reacted, because Charlie Kirk was so much a part of their lives. If you're a young person, Charlie Kirk was, I mean, that was a big deal, no matter how you felt about him, because he was so ubiquitous. I tore up the class for the next class, and we talked about Charlie Kirk. And I told them at the beginning, I'm like, this is not about politics. If we start talking about politics, we're going to take news quizzes for the rest of the hour. So there's your incentive not to do it. But just talking about the news coverage. And I think that's a piece of it. And then I'll quit going on about the class. My point with the class is teach them how to be skeptical journalists, and to be skeptical in equal measure. To ask those questions. And so we don't get into a lot of things that are overtly political, but what is overtly political?
Hi, thank you for your comments. I wanted to, a lot of what you were talking about seem to be about restrictions imposed on the press. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that battle is not yet over. We'll have to see what the Supreme Court does.
Right.
There's a lot to worry about there. You know, any claim about national security or an emergency, they seem to be laying down and playing dead. But the question that I want to ask you is that one of the things that worries me as much as restrictions imposed on the press is compliance by the press in advance. Mm-hmm. Self-censorship, and we're seeing all of that all over the country, not only in the press, but in universities and so on. How do you're a journalist professor, how do you prevent the press, your students, future journalists, from engaging in self-censorship?
The self-censorship or restraint is coming from at the corporate level and not from the individual journalists. And that is a tough thing for individual journalists to deal with. I mean, the level of anger inside CBS News right now, I can't even imagine. One of the things I tell my students is that one of the core principles of being a journalist is that you work for the community you serve, not the organization that employs you. And that can mean some tough choices about how you proceed as a journalist, but I think that's essential for journalists for that to be the guiding principle. Is the person who pays my check, writes my check, is not who I work for. I work for the community.
Professor Coates, I have a question for you in regards to you teaching your students how to fact check. Mm-hmm. So like for a number of us, we put our names onto Google and things come up. And I have in the past been interviewed by Paul Ortiz for his oral history on Vietnam combat vets. Mm-hmm. I also had a WUFT reporter come out and interview me. And so I have information I gave them, but when you look at Google, David Wilkham comes up as, yes, he was in the Army. He did not serve in Vietnam. He served in Korea. It had that I was in I Corps, but it was a different country. So right. It's like, if your students just do a superficial thing, say, oh, in fact checking, Wilkham, he wasn't even in Vietnam. It says he was in Korea, mm-hmm. even though I have a DD-214 and I have pictures and stuff like that.
Right.
And so the fact checking, I think, is really important because some people would be embarrassed if they say, Wilkham, he wasn't even in Vietnam, and here they're saying he did all this and that.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the basics of journalism is that reporters should, I tell my students, you need to find somebody who's in a position to know, and Google is not in a position to know. Especially now that we've gotten into Google using those AI overviews where they summarize, and most people, the days of the link economy in the web, the days of the link-based web are over. That's going to be gone. So when you get, and that's going to really hurt the economic model of journalism again, because our model is built around clicks, clicks on links. But they need to fact check by making phone calls and talking to people, which they hate because young people hate talking to people. If they can text you, they are all about that. But they don't like to talk to people. And, being a journalist is talking to people. So with mine, I emphasize over and over again, you need to talk to a human being, and you need to look for documents that are source documents. That's not always possible. It's not always easy, but you need to make that effort.
Okay, my question is, first of all, if I wasn't depressed when I came in here today, thank you very much for increasing my anxiety. I'm just overwhelmed, with what you've told us, and it is even more frightening than I realized. So, and I appreciate you bringing up about the fact, as a person who, when I walk out today, what do I do? Where do I go to fact check? How do I deal with this? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. There are the kind of the usual sites that people push: PolitiFact, Snopes, those sites that are focused on fact checking information and cite their sources and tell you how they did the fact check. I think what we call lateral reading, which is looking across sources so that you're not just, looking at one source, or if something shows up in social media, you're looking to see, trying to track back what the source is. You can do reverse image searches. I never do reverse image searches because I don't got that kind of time in my life, unless they're not that onerous, but unless it's something I'm doing research on or I'm going to publish myself. You know, I tell people, and this is a really unscientific method, but I find it works the best for me, and that's gut. When things feel, disinformation and misinformation is designed to make you angry. It's designed to work on the most powerful emotions. That's why it goes viral. That's why anything goes viral. Is the strongest human emotion. I wish it was love, but it's anger. And that when I feel something make me mad, I stop right then and look and check. So you can't check everything. I try to check the things that are high stakes or that are in my area of interest where I really want to be informed. And I use that, you know, is this making me really angry, or is it making me feel really vindicated? The really vindicated is just as dangerous as the really angry. Yes.
Question.
Yes, considering everything you said about deepfake, how do you go about recognizing deepfakes? And specifically, how do you teach your students to recognize deepfakes?
Yeah. I feel like the train is coming every time it does that, which I guess dates me, but I feel like the train is coming. Yeah. For deep, I mean, that is a moving target, and it moves every dadgum day. Because it used to be that I could tell, and it's still true to some extent, that you could tell people, you know, if they've got 8 fingers or if their hand is, you know, turned in an unnatural way, or if the background doesn't match the foreground. And that the background and the foreground still is a good indicator. There's been an image everywhere in the last, really over the weekend, that purports to show a sea of people protesting in New York. I've seen one for Detroit. I've seen one for Atlanta. It's the same picture. You know, and you can see because there's a guy in a red coat who repeats through the crowd. You can start to see the repetitive because it's just generating. So, you know, some of the things like that where you're looking for, does that look, you know, are there repetitive patterns in the image? That's a good one now. I use that one more than anything because that's what AI is doing, is that it's predictive. So it's using that predictive skill to predict that if these people appear in this row, they will appear again and again and again. But it gets harder and harder all the time.
Okay, my name is Ronnie Lovler. I'm a journalist. I don't misinform or disinform. I never have, I think. I could go on with a lot of things here. I won't. I'll get to the point. How do you deal with language? I am not a fan of Fox News per se, but I do take a look now and then, and I'm appalled by the language that is used in. They're not. It's not a news network. It's a propaganda. How do you deal language? So you talk about immigrants, but they're killers and murderers and illegal aliens and all these horrible things, but the words are repeated over and over and over again, and people just buy it. And how do you deal with language in this whole world of misinformation and disinformation?
Yeah, and that's, you know, again, that gets us into the question of bubbles and reinforcing, you know, the language that is tailored to reinforce the reason you're watching or reading that news organization. You know, the quick aside and commercial for the research we're doing at the consortium, we've developed an AI tool, an AI-assisted tool, that we're getting ready to launch into newsrooms. We are at the market, ready for market level now, that helps journalists identify potential bias and potential overly emotional language that they're using in their news coverage. I mean, you have to want to identify it. So I think we're talking more local news organizations and news organizations that are focused on a particular subject or topic. I think we can use, for those who want to have more precise, authentic, intentional language, we can use the AI for good in that instance, because it'll recognize patterns. I mean, I was an editor in newsrooms for 30, a journalist for 30 years, an editor for 20. I thought I could spot anything, and when I run this thing through a story, it will flag words that I'm like, oh yeah, that has a meaning that did not occur to me. So, I think there are opportunities with tools to get at that language question, but again, that has to happen in an organization that cares about that, and that is not tuning language up. And if the market incentive is to tune the language up, you're going to tune the language up.
Hold this close. How do you think that students and young folk like myself are navigating this sort of fraught political war zone of news sources, and how are people in general interacting with this very polarized language?
Yeah. I find that it runs in two directions, and you're more the expert on this than I am. Either young people who are deeply engaged and really dive deep and really are looking at, where is this coming from, and I'm going to curate my news sources, and people who have taken a step back from some of the TikTokery of the world. They're trying to curate a more slow kind of news environment, or people who are just avoiding it altogether. I think for young people that is largely true, that there is a strong news avoidance. There continues to be if it's really important, it'll come to me. I'll find out. It'll show up in my feed, or somebody will tell me about it. And I can't blame them for the news avoidance. I want to avoid news some days, and it can make people feel helpless. And it's the helpless piece that is the worst. Part of it, I think, is feeling like there's no point. That's the depressing take. I do think that the people who are, and the UF student population is not exactly a representative sample of. They're way too good and way too smart. I think when you get out of those university environments, you see it really fall off the deep end. I think that has to start in elementary school, middle school, has to start at home, it has to start, and you have to have it in high school. And unfortunately, a lot of that media literacy is gone now. There was a real effort and movement in public education to do more of that, and it's tricky. And I think a lot of schools and school districts have decided it's, the juice is not worth the squeeze, as they say. So.
Could you maybe elaborate on that a little further from the following point of view? Young people have so many options.
At this time, teachers, please send all juniors, all 11th graders to the auditorium. If you have 11th graders, only please.
All 11th graders out of here.
Please send all 11th graders. If you have 11th graders in your class, in the very grade level, just send those 11th grade students to the auditorium at this time for the expectations of subject. Thank you.
Thank you. But young people tend to only look at news sources that seem to, in some sense, affirm their own beliefs. Now, there was a time, not in too distant past, that people read the newspaper, and the newspaper was required to be somewhat broad-based in its coverage. That is no longer the case.
Right.
People select what they want to hear. And I'm not sure that there is any way to overcome that.
You know, it's a question, and you know, I don't exude optimism on that front. I mean, we are now 20 years, almost 20 years, 15 years into the social media age. Facebook was 2010, I think, 2009, 2007 maybe it goes back that far. So we're coming up on 20 years of that, and that world is embedded. That world is native to young people. That's all they've ever known, and it is their native world. And now it's a native video world. It's not a native text world. So if it can't be a video, and if it can't be a video that's how many seconds long? 30. 30 may actually be lengthy. You know, if it can't be something that's that short, and if it can't grab your attention as you're moving very, very fast through TikTok, you know, it does not catch. I mean, I do think the idea of influencers, as much as I hate that word, is an interesting one. You have to vet them the way that you do a traditional journalist, but there are influencers and aggregators who are reaching young audiences with news, not because they are reporting it themselves, but because they're creating these pipelines that share reported news and information. And that's I'm really looking at that right now. We're going to talk about that. I've added that to the class this semester. You know, the Democratic National Convention had an entire area set up for influencers because they recognize that they have so much influence that they network information to a much different audience. So, you know, I think maybe those of us who are more traditional journalists have to take a page out of that book, but not do it like the old fogies we are. I mean, one of the things that is definitely an issue is newsrooms who don't have social network natives, digital natives in their news organizations. We had this conversation in my class after the Charlie Kirk murder, when there was so much conversation about the cryptic things that were engraved on the bullets and what kind of, you know, cryptic message was being sent there. It was gamer speak. It was not some big, you know, conspiracy theory thing. It was stuff that came from gamers. You know how many newsrooms have people in it who are, you know, fluent in gamer culture? Not a lot. The overlap between journalist and gamer is, you know, that Venn diagram is, you know. Yeah, but again, that's one of those things. I mean, those of us who are parents of gamers or grandparents of gamers, that's a black box world, and in some ways that are really scary. But you don't know that lingo if you're not in it. They don't share it. They don't speak it to the rest of us.
Hi, very quickly, if we could get a law passed that requires AI content to be published on a particular site, can you think of some language that would protect the good work that AI provides to you so that it would be excluding whatever the language is so that people are aware there's AI with some exceptions?
Yeah. We can ask the AI what that policy would look like, what that language would look like. It'd be interesting to see what it said. That is a longer answer than I can probably give in this space. I mean, I think you really would have, it's part of the same problem there's been with social media. You really have to parse intention, you have to parse methodology, you have to parse the fact that anybody can be a journalist. It's not like we take an oath. There is no Hippocratic oath or professional regulatory board for journalists. So there is a lot of, that would be very tricky. It's not that it couldn't be done, but there are layers and layers and layers of parsing that would have to happen.
Thank you, Janet Coates, for the wonderful presentation. I'm sorry, Janet, you can't leave. Thank you for a wonderful presentation, Janet. Here's
thank you.
our First Amendment Foundation here.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I always love spending time with you all.
Well, we love you being here too, so you are invited back. Next month, I believe we'll have a speaker from the Lynx bookstore who will be talking about the stresses on selling books and doing things like that. So more First Amendment stuff. So thank you everybody for coming.